Good evening and welcome to the Midwestern Morks live stream. We got a bunch of really important topics to discuss tonight. The the train wreck in East Palestine, Ohio, and the devastation that's caused. The anti-war protest called Rage Against the War Machine and all the controversy surrounding that. And we're also going to go into Carlos's recent piece on National and Historical Nihilism and the importance of combating that. Without further ado, let's get into that.
Alrighty, folks, thanks again for joining us. The first topic of the day is the East Palestine, Ohio train wreck. But I wanted, before we start, to ask you, Noah, you are currently in Ohio, in Cleveland, Ohio. How far off are you from what took place in East Palestine, and what has the sort of general reaction been in your area to the event?
We're actually not really that far away. East Palestine is in like the far east on the border of Ohio, and Cleveland is considered part of Northeast Ohio. It's closer to Youngstown and Warren, but not very far off from us. People are rightly, angry and scared. The Ohio River, which is where all of this, what was it called, toxic or like vinyl chloride, I believe the chemical was dumped. That's our main waterway, that and the Cuyahoga River. And it's used for all kinds of stuff. And we'll get into the video in a bit from it, but it's absolutely disgusting that there aren't emergency crews out there right now. People are, at work, I go in and this is what everyone's talking about, right? Because it's so close. And not only that, the sort of attached to that, there was also an explosion at a chemical plant in Bedford, which is sort of not really a suburb, but a part of Cleveland. And it's just chemical disaster after disaster here. So it's all anyone is talking about, from, the Libyus Libs to the most conservative libertarians. Everyone gets it. Everyone gets together on this topic and says, we got to do something about this,
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've seen some of the videos. It's very sad, and what's sad is also the reaction of the government, and that's expected in a government that prioritizes profit over people. And it's important to see that all of this took place, maybe a month after the Democrats and the supposedly most pro-labor president stomped down on the rail workers, which were, not just fighting for better working conditions, for more time off, but, part of the conditions were things that included that are basically tied to some of the causes why this thing happened in East Palestine. So you're dealing with a situation where a company has been cutting corners left and right in order to maximize profit and lower the cost of productions as much as possible. And this is the effect. And this is what the workers have been talking about for a very long time. And this is in part one of the things that led them to strike, besides also the more immediate things like having more days off and other things. But it's important that the nation looks at what's going on, because the rail strike and the potential rail strike was something that got federal attention, and most people, realize that the Democrats came down on the workers and illegalized their ability to strike. And if you're involved politically in the left, you know that a good portion of the DSA members in the Democratic Party, the so-called progressives, voted in favor of imposing a bill on workers that illegalized their democratic voted right to strike. And now we have this, right? So I think the context is important, and these situations on their own are leading a lot of people, especially in that area, to question, what are the priorities of the government? Who does the government actually represent, and why is that the case? And can there be something different? And you see a bunch of videos that are coming out of just regular working people, like hitting the nail on the head about the fact that the government is really a committee for the affairs of the capitalist class. And in this case, these big train companies that, their profits keep going up, but the living conditions of their workers keep going down, and the conditions which lead towards disastrous events such as these just keep getting proliferated because they keep cutting corners to maximize profit. So I think a lot of working people are coming to realize that. And this is a moment that if you're a socialist in this country, you have to take advantage of. You can't be on your nitpickiness of, is this person a liberal? Is it a conservative? Is it a libertarian? It's a working class person, or a person from a working class community, that their material conditions incentivize them towards agreeing with your ideas. Their interests, their class interests, are in line with the ideas that you supposedly hold. So you should be reaching out to them and letting them know the root causes, the systematic causes of what they're experiencing on their everyday life, and the reality that there could be alternatives, and that there are alternatives that have functioned much more successfully. That's one of the topics that we're going to go into towards the end of the discussion on rail, which is the immense success of the Chinese rail system.
Now, I want to back that up a little bit first, because what this does, what these class interests do, and this growing sort of consciousness has been happening over the last few years of working class people, is it overcomes the old modes of thinking, right? We often hear people condemned as they're right wing or they're left wing, depending on who's doing the condemning, right? But what is the Marxist view of what is left wing or progressive, right? It isn't this sort of vague notions of all like, having a checklist, and you tick each of the boxes of, do you support this? Do you believe that? It is the force that is materially able to move society forward. And in the bourgeois era, that is the working class. And the working class becoming aware of its material interests is something that we cannot ignore. And putting them off for, ideas they held before this was shown them, or values they may not have share with you, or whatever it is, especially when it's not concrete, is not only stupid but irresponsible and counter-revolutionary. There's a word for that, and it's oh god, I just blanked on it. I apologize. But I also want to get into my other point on that, which is you talked about the effects of it, right? And I want to show a video of the effects that this has on our water supply, right? It's absolutely disgusting. And here, I'll share my screen now, and you guys can see it. It's wild, absolutely wild. We'll do a little video here. All right, she just tosses a rock in the creek. Now you can start to see the haze
Wow.
form.
Look at all that.
Look at it.
It's all in the bottom of the creek bed.
Look at that. And it just keeps growing, right? And solidifying.
Now look at it.
The only breaks in that now are the reflections of the trees. It's fully covered the creek.
Yeah, and you can see in other videos, you know, dead fish, uh, um, all hosts of different things. And what's funny is that the local authorities are saying that the water is drinkable and perfectly healthy. And there was a picture that came out of local authorities all drinking water together. And in the real corner of the picture, you see the bottom of what looks like a smart water bottle. So it's, you know, they're doing the same sort of stunt that Obama did when he went to Flint, Michigan. He's like, I'm going to drink the water. It's perfectly safe. Um, it's just very disgusting. And it really shows that the government doesn't care about its people. What the government cares about is the same interests which led to this catastrophe taking place, which is the capitalists. And you have a whole lot of folk in the Midwest specifically with all their "Don't tread on me" flags and, you know, libertarian ideas, government bad, government bad. But, you know, think about what sort of government is it that you're dealing with, right? There's this abstract
Bourgeois
idea.
government.
Right. It's an abstract idea of government in general. And it's our job to show them there's no such thing as government in general. It's always a specific form of government that's controlled by one or another class in a specific historical circumstance, and it functions in different ways accordingly. You know, the government exists, the state exists because there's an irreconcilable antagonism between classes that develops thanks to the development of the forces of production, and a state necessarily comes about. This is something that even, you know, the social contract theorists, even them were clear that, you know, there's some form of antagonisms or contradictions that develop in the state of nature, and people come together to form a state. Now, it's not the case that people come together to form a state. It's the case that, you know, the leading economic force, in order to protect its property, forms the state. But class society necessarily means that a state will have to be there to sort of uh, do its job, and to ensure that the interests of the dominant economic class is defended. And under our era, that means that the state really functions as a committee for handling the affairs of the capitalist class as a whole. And under a different society, when the working class and the popular masses are the ones in power, the state is going to function in that different form. And that's what, you know, Marxists have been calling for the last 150 years the dictatorship of the proletariat. All it really means, if you look at that word dictatorship, you know, we toss it out today and people think about Dr. Evil and the little thing with the ring. And, you know, it just really means the ability for dictating something in such a way so that it gets realized once you dictate it. And in another word, it's almost a synonym of the word power. And when you speak about the dictatorship of the proletariat, it means power in the proletariat. And if the proletariat are the working masses, then you're talking about a situation where power is in the hands of common people. And what's another way to speak about power in the hands of common people? Democracy. Demos, popular, common folk, and krasi, kratos, which is power. Um, Democracy is genuine democracy is the dictatorship of the proletariat, and that's, you know, a working class state. So it's all these ideas about the state bad. You know, what's interesting is that capitalists are able to use a deficiency of their state to deter people from socialism, because they think about the state in general. Socialism is just more state and not a qualitatively different form of state. And that's, you know, one of those ideological tricks that I think with organizing and mobilizing people, we can help them overcome. If they've gotten to the point where they realize the government really doesn't represent them, and in reality represents these large monopolies, you know, they're just a step or two away from realizing that that's the capitalist state, and that that's how things function, and that it could be different if the working class was in power.
Well, one of the things that I've said to my libertarian coworkers is, look, brother, what you call crony capitalism, I call imperialism, right? All we're talking about is that what we had at one point, which when capitalism was progressive, it built amazing productive forces, right? And that can't be denied and shouldn't be by any real communist. But it's turned into this, where the monopolies that formed now hold power over everything, right? And libertarians themselves will say, yeah, those monopolies are what the government serves, right? And they'll just, talk about big pharma or whatever else. All you have to do is relay that into a class analysis, and it works every single time it works. Getting back into this specific thing, though, and the government's absolute failed response. It was also a failure of government and these rail corporations that brought it about, right? And Railroad Workers United has a really, really good statement about this that Monthly Review published. So we can look at that. I just want to sort of go over broad strokes what they're saying. That basically the way the corporation has functioned has been in service of short-term profits always, right? And this leads to the necessary for them cutting of corners in order to operate at full capacity. So they get rid of safety workers. They use improper procedures to even put the equipment together. Let's see, what do they say? Deferred maintenance on rolling stock and infrastructure, long working hours and chronic fatigue, limited on the job training, and high turnover for workers. It's insane that they're able to get away with this. And each thing that they have listed as their complaints is another failure of the government to protect the people, showing us that the government is not serving the people at all, but instead that corporation.
And it's I believe it's in either that article or the other statement that they made about making rail public, which we'll address afterwards. They mentioned the fact that these companies do not want to grow. They are literally stifling the development of rail, and because it's just not profitable. And that's what you see. This is a general tendency in capitalism, in Euro-American capitalism, where it's gotten to the point where, thanks to the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, capitalists have not wanted to invest in productive industry. And it's been a process that economists are calling financialization. Some are wrongly separating it from what's at its root, which is the falling rate of profit. The capitalist has two options to go to in order to invest his capital, and the reinvestment of capital is what makes it capital. He can either take the route of productive industry and grow the economy in a real sense, but if that's reaping less and less profit because of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, he looks towards the other option, and that's speculation, finance, getting money through interest and rents, and all these different sorts of activities, which we have really seen take off in the US and in the UK since the 1970s, and other capitalist countries as well to a lesser extent. But, it's a very clear instance that productive industry is just pretty much dead, with the exception of the military and the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex in the US. Those are the only two places that are still producing things. And, one of them is an industry of death that just brings death around the world. The other one, you can also kind of call it an industry of death that just, produces sometimes medical things that are not necessary, like the opioids crisis, which was fabricated basically wholly by the medical pharmaceutical industrial complex in connection with the government and other NGOs and schools, but also, jacks up prices for things that are extremely cheap. So, the two industries that we have that can even be called seemingly productive are the most unproductive industries when it comes to looking at production in terms of human life. They're literally industries of waste and of death. So it's telling of the state of the senile and decrepit state of capitalist imperialism that we're in.
It shows us precisely that imperialism itself, as a stage of capitalism, has become moribund. And this is exactly what Marx predicted almost 200 years ago, going on right now, right? It is capitalism becoming so big that it becomes a fetter on its own development, therefore creating the forces that create the next thing. Within that is a technological aspect, and technology, the technological revolution, all of this means that a new thing is genuinely possible, a new way of producing. And this is why the sort of economic motion behind everybody sort of beginning to get it in our era, seeing all of these things as past their prime and illegitimate. And it is what directly leads to reproletarianization, by the way. And for us, the potential for an alliance between the proletariat and reproletariat.
Yeah, and it also leads to the eroding of what W.E.B. Du Bois called the American assumption. This ideological, fabricated idea that if you work hard enough, you can pull yourself by your bootstraps and be rich. With the destruction of the middle class over the last 50 years and the process that Noah calls reproletarianization, which is all tied to these developments and the rate of the falling rate of profit and financialization, that's destroyed. And that was one of the main ideological barriers for working people to see themselves not as agents which are socially flexible and which can climb the social ladder, but as working people with a concrete interest grounded in their material relation to production, and an interest which urges them to come together and fight for a different world. And that American assumption, that's being completely eroded with this process. And I think that we can't speak about this phenomenon of rail in a concrete and comprehensive manner without bringing up these diverse sociological, psychological, material changes which have taken place in American society over the last 50 or so years.
Absolutely, brother. And it actually ties into another idea from Du Bois, which is the psychological wage of being white,
Right.
right? Which tied itself into that ability of upward momentum and the
Mm-hmm.
creation of the American middle classes, which the Black community was absolutely legally cut off from.
Right.
And so this created what he called the psychological wage, right? The middle class had this sort of bourgeois hegemonic ideological view justified for a couple decades, right? And we can talk about the reasons that is class struggle, the existence of the Soviet Union, the end of the planter class itself being the impetus for all of it. But at the end of the day, it was still reinforced that they could work hard and it would pay off. That is no longer an option. That middle class, what's left of it is the PMC types, right?
Right.
And that's it. And with the reproletariat, which is, I mean, part of the working mass, right? It's not a wholly separate thing. This is becoming quickly, they're becoming quickly conscious of this fact, right? While they look backwards to parents with happy homes in the suburbs, right? And forwards to a life of menial low-wage service jobs and debt forced on them. And I want to actually talk about service work in general. There is a reason Marx used to compare this to slavery, right? Even if we don't always recognize it, serving other people as your life's work is seen as degrading for Americans. It just is. Even if we want to say, oh, all work is skilled work, whatever, that doesn't matter. There is that subconscious social notion in there. And so after all of this middle class gets destroyed, this is all that is left for the reproletariat. Deindustrialization and the globalization of all this production, along with financialization, spells that, right? And so we get to this point where we have all these masses ready and noticing that something is wrong. We have the civil rights movement having led to this sort of social revolution, and the old psychological wage of white people eroding at the same time. And these don't happen for no reason. That's what I really want this ramble here I'm on to get through, is they don't happen for no reason. And it
Right.
spells possibility in the USA like never before in our history. The question, as Du Bois said, of the 20th century was the question of the color line. Is that still the main question now that people are recognizing, to quote another American revolutionary, Martin Luther King Jr., that even if we all arrived in different ships, we're in the same boat now?
That's beautiful. Let's try to roll back into the Ohio Palestine story.
I
That was
apologize.
really good, man. And just to add another quick detail, it's also, the material conditions of a lot of this work, like the minimum wage that you can pay service workers, I think it's like $3 or something. It's heavily based on tip, and that's it creates the material conditions of the vast majority of them, the material conditions which are a lot more difficult than parts of the productive proletariat of the past.
For sure.
Would you like to bring up the article?
Before we go to that, though, while we're on this topic of Du Bois, this weekend, excuse me, I was a frog in my throat. This weekend on Saturday, I'm going to be presenting and on a panel at the W.E.B. Du Bois Symposium, which is being put on by the Saturday Free School. There's going to be a host of great speakers there, not just me, including Dr. Anthony Montero. And I don't even want to try listing them, but we're doing a small fundraiser to get me there. So anything you can give would be great. Just check out our Patreon, or Carlos knows more about the donations and how they work. So, yeah. By the way,
yes,
thank you to
pull up,
Kyle, our graphic editor, for the fantastic work he's done on these.
I'm trying to pull up the link tree so that I can copy and paste the link into the chat. Again, if you have the capacity to donate, it's done through a PayPal donation box where you'll be able to donate both through PayPal, but also through card, I believe, and it's compatible with most methods of payment. And it's absolutely necessary for us. We would like to be able to have Noah to have the ability, to pay for gas and for lodging expenses. So if you can spare a few bucks, that would be greatly appreciated. But do we want to roll into the comments from the Railroad Workers United about the way that they kind of predicted events like this happening, and how they are sure that similar events are bound to happen in the future if the same path continues to be taken?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanna read what they say is the. I apologize.
Can you pull it up? No.
Yeah. Which one did you want to look at, Carlos?
The monthly review one.
Okay. The one from them.
Yeah, Railroad Workers United.
You got it.
So that we can, as we read it, people can also see the.
Yeah, this is from my monthly review thing. Okay, so this is the line I wanted to read to you guys. I don't know why it's highlighting everything. At this time, the immediate cause of the wreck appears to have been a 19th century style mechanical failure of the axle on one of the cars, an overheated bearing, leading to derailment and then jackknifing tumbling cars. There is no way in the 21st century, save from a combination of incompetence and disregard to public safety, that such a defect should still be threatening our communities. What does that mean? Could you give us a bit of an idea on that and how that relates to just how capitalism has to function, Carlos?
Well, I think it's telling the fact that they're saying that the sort of crash that took place, it's like a 19th century sort of occurrence. And that just goes to show that we really just haven't developed, especially not in the areas that economic development matters. And we'll show in a little bit how the opposite has been the case in China, a socialist country that puts forward people and planet above any concerns for profit, and where capital is really used and bended to the will of human life. But I think it'd be good to read the second to last paragraph. It says, the short-term profit imperative, the so-called cult of the operating ratio of NH, North Southern, I believe, and the
Norfolk Southern, yeah.
Norfolk Southern, and the other class one railroads, has made cutting costs, employees, procedures, and resources the top priority. Again, this is important because if you have lower costs of productions, then the rates of profit are higher. In this case, NS and the other carriers have eliminated many of the critical mechanical positions and locations necessary to guarantee protection against these kinds of failures. Simultaneously, they regularly petition the regulators at the Federal Railway Administration for relief from historically required maintenance and inspections. So, all seems to indicate that if things keep going the way they're going, East Palestine was the first of many similar events that will be taking place across the nation and affecting many, maybe tens or hundreds of millions of Americans for God knows how long. And why is it happening? Well, it's for the simple case that the company wants to make more money, and it's making more money by cutting on its cost of production, and lobbying in order so that necessary inspections are not done, so that it can continue carrying out affairs in a way that's to the detriment of the safety of both its workers and of American communities through which these railroads pass.
Now, this is a point that I brought up with some coworkers who were libertarians, right? Libertarians are always talking about we need to get rid of regulations. And what I always tell them is which regulations, right? And when I say these are regulations put in place that make a business less profitable, they go, oh, well, they have to have those funds. And I go, exactly. No one is against getting rid of bureaucracy and red tape that makes small business less competitive. No one's against that. No Marxist is, nobody. What people are against is getting rid of necessary safety regulations like this that are put in there because these corporations are able to lobby the government in order to try to offset their own falling rate of profit. And in our era, that falling rate of profit has been falling for a very long time. Think about what industries began the U.S. capitalist system: rail, steel, and cotton, right? And really, modern America is all steel and rail. And so when they talk about the short-term profit imperative, that is all trying to overcome the fact that if they don't do these things, they're no longer profitable. And therefore, we no longer have a rail system. And so when I explain this to my libertarian coworkers, they go, holy shit. I'm sorry to swear. Capitalism is the thing at the center of this. And I go, now you see what I've been saying for years, right? When you can make it concrete, and this is a beautiful way to make it concrete, well, a tragically beautiful way to make it concrete for them, people just get it. They get it because it affects them. And in our era, it affects them more than ever.
Yeah, and just listen to this last sentence. The wreck of train 32N has been years in the making. What other such train wrecks await us remains to be seen, given the modus operandi, so the mode of work, of these Class 1 rail carriers. We can no doubt expect future disasters of this nature. And
Wow.
what have the workers been saying should be done? Well, they've been calling for the nationalization of rail, making railways public. That's that's incredible. That's absolutely
Precisely.
incredible.
Because if they're public, then they aren't forced into this paradigm where they need to keep cutting these corners to make up for the falling rate of profit. Because the point isn't that corporations' shareholders getting another million. The point is having a rail system. And China gets this. And I'd like to show, just to sort of show you the difference between this system and a system based on getting things and people where they need to go. Just the
Before we
remarkable
go to that, can
difference.
we
It's I'm
no
sorry, Carlos.
before we go to that, can we pull up the Railroad Workers United link where they call for the public ownership of rail, because these have been demands that uh, have been given for many years now, and which include a critique of the practice of precision scheduled railroading, which they consider to be one of the more fundamental reasons why this event took place in East Palestine. Scroll down.
Right
So,
there. Boom.
do you mind reading those paragraphs? Because I think that they're
Yeah.
quite clear.
More than a decade ago, at the 2012 Convention of Railroad Workers United, the question of railroad ownership first came before those members assembled. Since that time, the organization has discussed and debated whether or not to take a position on the question. In face of the degeneration of the rail system in the last decade, the RWU Steering Committee, or their leadership, voted unanimously at the October monthly meeting to adopt such a position. And so that means the whole leadership, who is representing each of the locals, voted to do this. And they say, while the rail industry has been incapable of expansion in the last generation, what were we just talking about, right? They're incapable. While it has become more and more fixated on the operating ratio to the detriment of all other metrics of success, precision scheduled railroading, or PSR, has escalated this irresponsible trajectory to the detriment of shippers, passengers, commuters, trackside communities, and workers. On-time performance is in the toilet. Shipper complaints are at an all-time high. Passenger trains are chronically late. Commuter services are threatened, and the rail industry is hostile to practically any passenger train expansion. What was Carlos just talking about, right? And by the way, this is also exactly what we were saying Marx said almost 200 years ago, that it becomes a fetter on its own development. Anyway, continuing on, the workforce has been decimated as jobs have been eliminated, consolidated, and contracted out, ushering in a new, previously unheard of era where workers can neither be recruited nor retained. Locomotive, railcar, and infrastructure maintenance has been cut back. Health and safety has been put at a risk. Morale is at an all-time low. The ongoing debacle in national contract bargaining sees the carriers, after decades of record profits and record low operating ratios, which is basically their income to outcome ratio, refusing to make even the slightest concessions to the workers who, contrary to what the class ones may state, have made them their riches. How class conscious is that, by the way? The workers creating that value.
Oh, this is, I think, one of the more radical unions in the country. And I mean, just step back and listen to what it's saying. Like, they're not calling like, hey, tax these people and subsidize. No, they're nationalize rail, because that's the only thing that can solve the problem. I don't know if do you mind putting it back up, because we're going to read the
Yeah,
last
I'm so
paragraph.
sorry.
That's
I thought you were done.
they call for the nationalization, but this is incredible. This is, the sort of militancy in the labor movement that we haven't seen in, I would say, almost near to a century in the U.S.
Yeah.
The last
And at
paragraph.
least a generation, right? And
Yeah,
this is the
that's very
last generation dropping the ball, not preparing us for the fight of today.
right. The last paragraph says, since the North American private rail industry has shown itself incapable of doing the job, it is time for this invaluable transportation infrastructure, like the other transportation modes, to be brought under public ownership. During World War I, the railroads in the U.S. were in fact temporarily placed under public ownership and control. All rail workers of all crafts and unions supported, unsuccessfully, keeping them in public hands once the war ended, and voted overwhelmingly to keep them in public hands. Perhaps it is time once again to put an end to the profiteering, pillaging, and irresponsibility of the Class 1 carriers. Railroad workers are in a historic position to take the lead and push for a new, fresh beginning, for a vibrant and expanding, innovative, and creative national rail industry to properly handle the nation's freight and passengers. And I know that it's not very good to say that when the government starts to do something, that's socialism. But the reality is that these are socialistic measures. Put the rail industry in the hands of the government and allow it to develop, which is the only thing that's going to overcome the fetter that these relations of capital are creating. It's literally the profit motive, the relationships of the existing order, which are preventing the development in this incredibly important area. And the workers are saying enough is enough. Take it into public ownership, make it work for the American people and not for the profit of a small few. And this is incredible. If this doesn't highlight the fact that we're in a moment where not only is the American empire in decline, not only is it showing its moribund character internationally, not only are there petty fights within the ruling class at home, showing the fact that the ruling class cannot continue to rule in the old way, but you also have a level of militancy and class consciousness that we haven't seen in decades, or I would even add close to a century. So you have to ask yourself, as a socialist, as someone who sees the response of the current crisis, not in reforming the system that got us here, but in completely overthrowing it and establishing something new that's headed by working people. You have to ask yourself, what is a priority for people who are socialists today? To bicker about small things with each other, or to organize, unite, and bring together the working class into a movement that can actually achieve the aims that they already want? They're not going to achieve those aims through the Democratic Party, especially not the Democratic Party that just prevented them from striking, that illegalized them and cited very clearly in the favor of the railroad companies, which have just done this horrific thing that's going to affect millions and millions of Americans. The solution to the problems that the working people in this country have, and the way to achieve the aims that they already want, is socialism. And if we're not organizing for that, we're betraying not just our working class at home, we're betraying the working people around the world that are getting bombed by the US and having their governments overthrown because of the same capitalist vampires that suck our country dry at home. They're doing it to everyone else abroad. And it is our duty to fight against those monsters, not to say, oh, but this one is less evil than the other one, let's vote for this one. To do that in this moment is absolutely criminal. And it's criminal not just against the people of the world, but it's criminal in the face of history. History has given us a challenge, and our challenge is to organize our working class and conquer power. And if we're not fighting for that today, we're standing against history, and we're an obstacle to the movement for socialism.
And I want to add that, why is the left not here? Why is the Communist Party not leading this, right? That is what I want to know here. I love the working people of this country. I love our Communist Party, and I know that we can make this a revolutionary mass. I know we can. But if we're too concerned with middle class, petty bourgeois concerns about, we need a woman in this industry and another minority in that industry, we're forgetting that the women's struggle is a class struggle, right? It is against the ruling class, not against men, right? The liberation of the Black community is a class struggle. It is not a struggle against other workers, but against a concrete ruling class that millions upon millions of workers all over this country are beginning to recognize right now. And if we're telling them, no, you're too unenlightened for me, you're too whatever it is, then we are actively alienating them. And I was going to bring this up when we got to national nihilism, but we're creating what we call a right, but what is in actuality an anti-left. All of our right wing in America these days is frankly just anti-left. There are people searching for answers that the left has alienated with its purity fetish.
Absolutely. Emancipation for oppressed and marginalized communities is not going to come when they see themselves equally represented in the bourgeoisie and its pundits in the media and NGOs and the academy. That's not emancipation. And insofar as in this moment where real emancipation can be conquered for working people, especially people in marginalized communities that are oppressed by a state that needs to perpetuate oppression across the board in order to protect the exploitation of working people that it's doing and in order to protect its profits. If we consider that the struggle for equal representation to be in substance of more value than coming together and bringing workers across different current world views in favor of fighting for a united working class movement, a movement that takes into account the real existential questions of nuclear war that we're facing because of the fact that the empire doesn't want to back down and wants to sustain its hegemony. The fact that we have crumbling infrastructure in the US consistently rated in the D range. I mean, we're talking about the richest country on the planet that has infrastructure that, some people have used the term third world country, but the third world has bad infrastructure because of empire and colonialism. There should be no reason why we have bad infrastructure, but we have horrible, there's a plethora of issues at home that are not being handled. And the only way that they can be handled is through a collective working class movement. And you can't have that if you make the standard for organizing with different people purity. If you're approaching organizing through the purity fetish, then your slogan is no longer workers and oppressed people of the world unite, but enlightened workers and oppressed people of the world unite. And that's a slogan and a way of approaching politics that's going to get us absolutely nowhere. It's going to get us right where we are, which is in a position where all we've had is defeats for the last 60, 70 years. And we can't do that.
Not to mention that what is enlightened is a wholly subjective thing, right? So what you have is, again, what we have right now, a bunch of different tiny factions that the masses don't even know exist, arguing over who's actually enlightened and who's backwards and reactionary. When the Marxist view of these things, by the way, is from a material basis, and they're wrong on almost every count when they talk about it. But not only that, our ruling class is using our state to march us directly towards nuclear war and World War III right now, right? At a time like this, considering the purity of the workers that you need to audition for rather than pretending they need to audition for you is absolutely counter-revolutionary. And if you call yourself a communist while doing this, you're insulting the word communist. You're insulting the legacy of this movement with such figures in it as Henry Winston and Lenin and Stalin. What would Stalin tell you if you were going around saying, oh, I don't want to organize these workers because they've said bad things? Stalin would call you an idiot, right? I mean, there's no other way I could put it. You would not make it in the Bolshevik or the Communist Party of the Soviet Union with that kind of attitude. Moreover, you wouldn't make it in any existing powerful communist party around right now. What would the Chinese party do to a member who started talking down to working class Chinese people? What about a Cuban, right? They would not put up with this. You'd be shown the door very quickly, and chances are you wouldn't have even been able to get in the first place. Our job right now is to build our institutions into American versions of that, right? And we do that at the same time as gaining mass support, which you cannot do. You cannot do if you gatekeep the working class.
It's very important to remember that we don't organize based on ideologies. We're not just, going into wherever we're going and asking, who thinks like us, who is ideologically aligned with us the most. Okay, all right, let's go. Let's start. We're organizing based on class because we realize that regardless of the social consciousness that working people start in, they have an objective interest. They have an objective interest in participating as a leading role as the front rankers, a concept that Henry Winston used to use, as the front rankers in the struggle for socialism,
Yeah.
So we can't do that if we're expecting purity. But I think it's important to note that it's not only the case as it was, 100 years ago, or perhaps a little more now, since before the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, these ideas about the success of a socialist society were still kind of up in the air. You had to say, think about how much better it would be if we had these conditions and not these. Today, we don't even have to do that. We have it in the flesh, the success of socialism. And specifically, and nowhere is it clearer than in the case of trains, where China is the country that has more high-speed rail than any other place in the world. They just developed a new train that goes at the speed of a plane. Do you know? Can you imagine
the levitating train and
the levitating train?
Let me show you all this thing. Compare this to the state of our infrastructure and our trains, and it's absolutely shameful what our ruling class has gotten us into. Here it is. China unveils 373 mile per hour levitating train, fastest ground vehicle in the world. Look at that, right? And then compare it to the images of the Norfolk Southern train, right, collapsing, and what you saw in that creek bed. It's wild. They actually compare it to the Tesla Model S Plaid, which the company builds as the fastest production car in the world. That tops out at 200. So it's almost double the fastest thing that Elon Musk can make, right? Wow. It's
just think about that in terms of convenience. Like, you can get a plane to do the trip in that many miles in around the same time. But at what time do you get to a noon flight? At what time do you get to the airport? I don't know if it's just a Cuban thing, but they tell us get there if the flight's at noon, get there at 8. How long does it take once you land to get out?
That's because you're Cuban, brother.
It might be just because I'm Cuban, right?
Yeah. No, that's
what time are you getting there? You getting there at 11:30?
For a noon flight, I have to get there at 10. And my wife flies all the time. She's a librarian and she works for a tech company, right? So she goes all over the world to meet with these libraries. And anyway, when she gets there, she has all the fancy like TSA pre-check and all that. She still has to get there an hour and a half early.
That's not the case with trains, right? So if you have the same, it's a 3-hour flight and then a 3-hour train ride. You just get to the train, pay your ticket, you go in, that's it, you're done. And that's not the case with so it's just so incredibly convenient. And
we have the technology these days to literally have a scanner scan your phone in your pocket and you can just walk on. We don't do
in China,
that.
They use their face.
It's not profitable.
In China, there's an option that people pull their mask on and they scan their face and they let them go in. It's the future. If you want to look at the future, You look at China, it's the most advanced civilization in the world right now, and it shows in the flesh the superiority of socialism. And that's something that Deng was very clear about when he was embarking in reform and opening up and developing the plans. He's like, we've done a lot in the last 30 or so years since the founding of the PRC. We've done a lot. We've broken metrics in terms of the increase in life expectancy of our people. But look at where we are in the world. Compare ourselves to the developed world. There's a big inequality, and we have to bridge this, because we'll show people in the flesh the superiority of socialism when they're able to come and see, wow, this is superior. And China has achieved that today. Just look at the amount of people coming from the West to China that are not politically conscious, they're not socialists, but they get there looking for a better life. They start vlogs and they're like, oh my God, the only place that I can live a comfortable life, or one of the only ones, is China. There's literally students going once they graduate to China because it's the only place where they can accumulate enough money in order to pay off their student loan debts. They can't do that in the US. They can't do that in any other European country. They can
Well,
do that in
the loan isn't even meant for them to ever be able to pay it off in the US, right? The creation of debt is making up for financialization, and that's a whole other topic. But here's what I really want to get at. I don't really want to get at, but it's grinding my gears, so I have to say it. This is what really bugs me about the purity fetish of so-called communists who talk about China being not real socialism, the whole Western Maoists and all these people. When they talk to people and they go, all right, socialism's always failed. And they go, yeah, that's true. China's capitalist and evil. They see China. They see it. They see them succeeding. They see all this wonderful stuff. And they go, well, why do you want to hold on to China when it was impoverished and there was a giant famine? And it's ludicrous to not be proud of the accomplishments of our brothers and sisters fighting the same fight we're fighting over there. It's wild to me that the purity fetish and these all middle class, let's face it, all these middle class forces has them condemning them because they're succeeding. Mm-hmm. It's just like Lenin said, right? That in his criticism of Kautsky, or the Second International, that they want every revolution but the one that succeeds. Don't you dare succeed. Have your revolution, sure, but don't win. Whatever you do, don't win, right?
It's important to also mention, as you did, the class character of this purity fetish, because it's not often that working people struggling to make ends meet look at China, where 90% home ownership rate, the rent that people have to pay are like 10 to 20% of their paycheck, and they're like, have they abolished commodity production? I don't want to go there if they haven't abolished commodity production.
Right? And they act as if you can just decide to do that one day. Be like, oh,
yeah, like there's this button, because Xi Jinping has this button that he can click and abolish commodity production just from one day to the next, and he just doesn't do it because he's an asshole. No, it's very clearly this phenomena. It comes from a sphere of society that's well off and whose comfort affords it to continue having the purity fetish, purity as the standard through which they judge reality. And the paradox is, and frankly, here's the paradox, that by expecting purity from everywhere in the world, they get to always side with the most impure place in the world, the most decrepit and murderous empire, which is the US. These are the same folks that will turn around and tell you, yeah, but we got to vote for the Democrats because they're the lesser of two evils. How come the empire is never impure enough to stop supporting, but it's always our comrades outside of the sphere of influence of empire trying to create something that you have never even been fucking close to doing? They're the ones that are always too impure to support. It's a lack of dialectical thought, because if you're actually thinking dialectically, then you realize that there's nothing in the world, not in thought, not in nature, not in human society, that is pure. And that is something very clear in every dialectical mind, from Hegel to Marx to Engels to Lenin to Mao. Everything contains within itself contradictions. Everything is impure. Everything is heterogeneous. Nothing is purely one thing. And these people treat it as if you can just have a pure socialism and you can just abolish the commodity production from one day to the next, abolish, bourgeois subjective. It's completely insane. Like, we haven't abolished within capitalism certain forms of feudal production,
Right.
or certain forms
100%.
of productions from the earlier stages of capitalism. Every Sunday there's like a farmer's market. Is that state monopoly capitalism, the stage that we're in? No, because it's never purely one thing. It's composed of a variety of other things that are mediated by the main thing, but that exist in a way that's not that. It's both mediated by it, but it's also not that. So, to expect purity is just, it's
It,
insane.
it is all a process. And when we talk about bourgeois society, it's because the bourgeois mode is the predominant thing, right? What's currently reigning the world. And I mean, honestly, we're moving towards more socialism now, but let's beyond the scope of this. What I want to focus on about what you just said is, oh God, I just lost it. Oh, I just lost it. Oh, I remember. I apologize. So when they do this sort of, and you'll hear them talk about campism, and they completely misunderstand what campism was. But they'll act like they're the people that go like neither Washington nor Beijing, or it's the same thing as neither Moscow nor Washington was back in the day, right? Where they believe that there's some third pure position to have. The struggle is between these two things. When you don't coincide with the progressive forces, you are automatically on the side of what is more powerful, because you are adding ambivalent support for the status quo. And so when you aren't vocally anti-war, you are therefore supporting a war effort. Whether you want to believe it or not, you are that ambivalence. And Lenin explains this ambivalence in detail, by the way, when he talks about revolutionary potential. And he talks about what the party of the proletariat needs is, one, the party itself, the institutions to be built. Two, outright support and workers. So people that are for you. And three, the ambivalent support of the masses, at least, right? You need them to at least go, yeah, that's what I prefer, right? Or I don't care either way. And when you get that, that's when you have potential, but you apply the same mode of thought to everything. And so when you aren't pro alliance with the Chinese proletariat, you are therefore siding with our predominant ruling class, which is wholly against it, right? And the same goes for war. And this might be a good way to transition to our next topic, because we've already been going on for about an hour on this one.
Let's I'm gonna do the logo swirl, and then we'll transition into the war so that we have clear cut segments. But okay, so the second topic that we wanted to address was the rage against the war machine protest rally that took place, I believe, 2 days ago now on Sunday in Washington in front of the Lincoln Memorial. This is a protest that has brought about quite a bit of controversy on different parts of the left. Frankly, I think that the most controversy has been has arisen from people whose works I've followed for a while, and who have the same positions, quite frankly, on these issues as the people that led the protests. A lot of these people have been speaking out against the U.S. proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. They speak against anti-China propaganda and defend China. So they speak in favor of Julian Assange. They speak against the U.S. empire. They speak against and in favor of the things that are represented by the 10 points that the Rage Against the War Machine protest sort of centered as its demands. So it was kind of weird, because I had friends and people whose work I follow on both sides, and it was like, you guys agree. I know you agree on the key issues. Why why so much pettiness in terms of whether to support it or not? And I think we should tread lightly, because I'm sure that we have a lot of friends that are on both sides, and I think that each side held their position because they felt that it was the right thing to do. And if we think that one side is wrong, our hope should be that with time that they would see that, and if similar things take place in the future, they change their mind. Or if we end up being our position ends up being wrong, then hopefully at one point we change our mind. But I want to preface it by saying that we're not going to we don't want to dismiss the people that will be criticizing. We hope that they change their mind if it ends up being the case that we're correct. We think we're correct, but that's I think it's important to preface that, because very often you give a critique and it gets very emotional, and people are like, okay, these people are condemning me, let's not work, and I think that's counterproductive.
Right. Yeah, I want to say that, I personally disagree with a whole bunch of people on a whole bunch of things. I will never I will never let it get in the way of revolution, of class struggle, of even friendships, right? I'm good friends with some family of my wife that we disagree on almost everything, but we still get together and have a good time. It's not an issue unless it's concrete and material and preventing something from happening, right? And so anyone that disagrees with us on that's fine. Disagree all you want. In fact, if you want to disagree, address what we're saying rather than, just trying to lump us in and pretend we think the exact same thing as, the Mises people of the Libertarian Party who were at this rally. And my main criticism here is, where is your movement? Where is the left's anti-war movement? We are hurtling towards World War III right now, and that is terrifying. If these people want to be against war and they're coming from a libertarian position, that's fine. You know what I see it as? I see it as them losing the character of neoconservatism and gaining a more progressive character. And I am confident enough in Marxism-Leninism and our message to know that when we present it to them and to the masses who may follow the organizations themselves, that we will win them over. We are correct, right? So I want to take a progressive thing and bring it forward to a whole nother level. Yeah, go ahead, Carlos. Sorry.
I don't think few things are easier to do than to show how war is driven by capitalist imperialism. If you have people that are already against war, they're a step away from being convinced into seeing that it's capitalism. None of us were born socialist, realizing that the wars that are in front of us are a result of monopoly capital, finance capital, and trying to expand its spheres of influence abroad, or prevent other countries outside of the spheres of their spheres of influence from encroaching upon their own spheres of influence. None of us are born knowing this, right? Especially not in our society that it's heavily propagandized, and there's so many ideological layers that we have to progressively pull back. And it's if we really reflect on our lives, if you consider yourself a communist, you must come to the awareness that it's been a dialectical development of you getting to where you are. You're constantly overcoming, sublating your older self and becoming better. So if you can realize that that's what's taking place with yourself, why not see that as a genuine possibility for all these hosts of people that are already in a very, very, very progressive position by opposing the war, opposing NATO, being in favor of Julian Assange, hoping to end empire. I mean, just go down the list. I know there's cringy views and unfortunate views that some of them have on other things, but they're already on the money in those things. And look at people who call themselves socialists within, I don't know, DSA. Have they had as radical and as progressive and as according to the positions that Marxist-Leninists should have on this war? Do they even have that on those very key issues concerning geopolitics and the struggle against imperialism and the struggle against, the constant escalation towards nuclear Armageddon, they even don't have them. So why is
half of them are calling this an inter-imperialist rivalry because they
Jesus
can't
Christ.
understand the anti-imperialist nature of modern Russia, and they dismiss everything that would actually lead them to learning this as Putin propaganda, or don't worry, hey, it's not the Soviet Union anymore, right? Like, it's very vulgar and surface level. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just had to say that.
But even in the more progressive organizations that are to use it's not a dichotomy alike, but the left-right dichotomy, people that are to the left of DSA, that would consider themselves Marxist, Leninist, communist, there's a good segment of them that want to hold on to a similar, neither Beijing nor Washington. They want to condemn the Russian special operations as an invasion that was immoral, illegal, and that should have never happened. And then they also want to contextualize it with the events of, NATO's expansion eastward and the 2013 coup and the installment of fascists and the bombing of the people in the Donbass and the 14,000 dead and, Angela Merkel and everyone, coming out and saying that the real reason why they signed the Minsk Accords was so that they can buy time to militarize Ukraine. If you look at things in their context, which a lot of them do a very good job on, your conclusion cannot be blame both sides. Your conclusion has to be, look, these people were escalating to doing a genuine, stronger attack than anything they had done in the 8 years previous on the Donbass region, which is ethnically Russian, which has been, repressed by the Ukrainian government at least since 2014, but really since farther back. They've had their language banned. It's just completely racist and led by fascists. You have this condition, and you have the people in that region asking for 8 years for Russia to step in. You have the most progressive parties in that area, the Communist Party of Ukraine, the Communist Party of Donetsk, Lugansk, the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. You have these forces asking for the United Russia, for the leading party in Russia to step in, and they didn't do it for 8 fucking years, and then they do it in order to prevent a catastrophe. How do you know all that context and then say, oh, the invasion is condemnable, we have to condemn them, they're both to blame, both sides? Russia has been asking for peace from the start. The only side which has not wanted peace and has proliferated this massacre, which is treating Ukrainians as cannon fodder, is the West and the US specifically. So how do you know the whole context and then say, oh, it's both sides? And what's sad is that part of the communist movement in the US, people who I agree with on, 9 out of 10 things, they've taken that position. And then here you have some nitwits, libertarians and stuff, taking the right position. Right. And having more radical demands than, the other protests that have been done against war.
How do you cede that ground in the war of positions to them? To the Libertarian Party, you're going to let them outflank you like that on the issue of a proxy war your ruling class is waging? Right? How are you going to do that? You should be ashamed to call yourself a communist at that point. And by the way, you shouldn't. But here's an interesting angle that I was thinking of. One of the main things, and you see this not just with this, but with everything. I saw someone say that, Max Blumenthal, the founder of the Gray Zone Project, one of the best investigative journalist outlets in the entire country, was now a Nazi because he was in support of this, right? And so they act as if, one, they make a caricature of the libertarians and whoever else, the other weirdos that were there, right? 2, they then pretend that every idea of Max Blumenthal's is now shared with them. And 3, they condemn the whole thing. And this is the brand ideology of modern late imperialist capitalism, right? This only exists in our era, and the purity fetish is one of the best ways of explaining it, right? Max Blumenthal is tainted. No matter what he's done in the past, every position he holds on everything else does not matter because we disagree with some other positions, that some of the other people there have said, right? This isn't about those positions. This isn't about X, Y, or Z. This isn't about a government regulation or whatever it is. This is about ending the proxy war with Russia. This is about attacking our ruling class, whether the Mises people are aware of that or not. That is precisely what they're doing. And if we can use them to attack our ruling class, hell yeah, I'm going to use them, right? Don't expect me to turn that down. I'm not going to. And when it comes to something else, I'm going to fight those people tooth and nail. Whatever is good for the class struggle, that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm not going to, mince around because they say bad things. I'm just not.
Absolutely. And, I couldn't see a clearer manifestation of the purity fetish. These are the same folks. And the importance of the purity fetish is that it gives you a concept to see this phenomenon comprehensively and not just see, but they don't want to approach, working class people who voted Trump because they're too impure. Okay, but they also reject these socialist states because they're too impure. Oh, but they also do this and those are not disconnected things. Those are all connected in a worldview, a Weltanschauung, a way that they view the world, which is anti-dialectical, and it's the way that I've been labeling and that we have been discussing as the purity fetish. And there isn't a clear manifestation of that than this. And you were talking about the guilty by association situation with Max Blumenthal, and he became impure.
Mm-hmm.
You go into that with other people that are not pure, and you get contaminated. Your purity gets desecrated. It might as well put the scarlet letter A on him. It's a puritanical ethic. It's just weird, and at its core, the worldview that it's grounding it's a reactionary worldview.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a reactionary worldview, and
we're going to get people saying the same thing about us after this. They're going to be like, oh, you guys critique blah, blah, blah. And Jackson Hinkle was there. So you agree with everything Jackson Hinkle thinks on everything else. And no, I'm sure there is some overlap in what we think, but there's a lot of disagreement too. Does that matter? In what way does it matter? You know what I mean? And it's it reminds me a lot, and we were discussing this when we were setting up the stream, of the sort of ultra-left, new sort of wokest view of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln did not go into the Civil War wanting to free the slaves politically, right? Who knows what he thought personally. I think he believed slavery was morally wrong, but whatever. They say, Lincoln didn't want to do that. He was racist. He was this and that. But what other force did emancipation, right? Was there a pure one? No, there wasn't. There's a reason the Soviet Union praised Lincoln. There's a reason our Communist Party used to carry banners with Lincoln's face in it into the streets. There's a reason they named our armed forces the Abraham Lincoln Brigades, fighting Spanish fascism. There's a reason the Soviet Union praised him up and down. There's a reason Mao wanted to put him into the Communist Party of China posthumously. This purity that they judge everything against, this pure ideal that only exists in their heads, that is divorced from the world around it that creates it. It's cuckoo bananas, There's no other way to put it.
You and your bananas. But you have people saying that you have I think there's a comment up here that you have imperialists like Tulsi Gabbard speaking. And obviously there's a lot of people there that probably had horrible views about China. Definitely. They probably I saw a tweet of one of the Mises people who was just saying the most absurd and ignorant shit about the Chinese spy balloon, and also racist shit. But the question is does that prevent you from working towards peace in a way in which they're also there in an area that's very, very important? And I think, perhaps because we're both, going through Black Reconstruction, and because we have this event coming up that we'll plug in just a minute when we're done with the segment, the logic that they have wouldn't have led to anything as radical as what happened during the Second American Revolution, the Civil War, to happen. Because if they would have expected purity from a North that was, maybe less racist than the South, but not really.
Not
If they
really.
would have expected purity, they would have never had what Du Bois calls the general strike,
Right.
which was the reason why the war was won. You had black workers in the South, slaves, migrate to the north. They went up north and they fought in the ranks of the Northern Army and they helped as workers and they did a whole host of things. And that's why the Civil War was won. And they pressured a movement which objectively was not anti slavery. They just wanted to prevent the expansion of the Southern Kingdom into the West and into the South. It wasn't an anti slavery movement that the North had, but it turned into one because it was pressured by the black workers in the South. So if you're telling me that you have an anti-war rally that you're going to reject because they don't invite you and because there's questionable people in there, you would have never, with that logic, been able to do what those 4 million revolutionary workers in the South did, because they said, fuck it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lead the country. And they did the same thing. The same vanguard of black workers was the one that led the civil rights movement through the Communist Party, the Third American Revolution. The most progressive things that this country has done has been because black workers have said, I don't give a fuck if I'm wanted or not. I'm going there and I'm leading the movement and I'm doing what has to be done. So you're going to sit here and say, oh, they didn't invite us. We've been doing these anti-war protests that, just people in our organization show up to. They didn't invite us. I'm going to condemn it. No, go there and lead. Go there and lead. Be the leading voice of the protest, connected to the struggle of oppressed and marginalized communities, connected to capitalism, connected to empire. Go there and lead. Why won't you do it?
1000%. And
That's
here's
what Du Bois would have done. That's what King would have done. That's what all the best leaders of our past would have done and told you to do. Why aren't you doing that?
one absolute go there and lead should be the slogan. Go there and lead, right? The answer is in Marxism, Leninism. We have the answer. We have the way out. And all those people that show up or view it or support it based on, getting there through libertarianism or whatever else, Tulsi Gabbard, whoever, it doesn't matter. You go there and you present your case with the actual facts better. Guess what? You just strip them of their support and gain that support for us, right? You go there and lead. We could have done that. We could have easily, I don't want to get, and easily is a big word, but taking over, if you have the truth and you have the facts and you have the only way out of the crisis on your side, is a matter of actually doing it rather than, sitting around discussing whether or not the other people that want to do that same thing are good enough.
And guess what, man? If they do their protest in March, we'll support it as well.
Hell yeah.
Because we supported the previous one, the one that they did, I think, last month. Get people mobilized, get them to see the fact that the difficulties that they face when they go to the supermarket and they can't afford shit, or they have to cut down how much food they eat because of the rising prices of the things that they need in order to subsist. Get them to see how that's connected to the U.S.'s proxy war against Russia and how that's grounded on the capitalist system at a specific stage, which we call imperialism. Get them to see that. And if you are going to do it on your own, I'll critique you not being there. But when you do it, I hope to show up. And, we hope to have people show up and we'll promote it in the same way that we promoted the other one. Because you know what? If we're not right in doing this and you end up being right, we're not going to let our ego get in the way. If you end up being right, we'll tell you that you're right. And we'll say we're wrong, and hopefully, show us wrong. Show us that our positions are wrong. Give us the best fucking march that we've seen since the 2003 marches against Iraq. Give us that and give us more. If you could do it, give us that and give us more. But if you can't do it, man, try to align yourself with other forces that you agree on those areas with, but maybe not on other ones, and pull from their audience. A lot of those people are working people that are just there because the YouTube algorithms took them to libertarians. and to, other right-wing nuts that have this Ukraine position correct for some reason or another, but that they have it correct. You know how many people have had access to Marxist ideas, genuine Marxist ideas? Very little. And if you're going to already go to a rally where you're in agreement, that's the rational kernel that you use to rearticulate them towards Marxism. That's what organizing is. You get ideas that are already in people's common sense and feelings, and you rearticulate them towards socialism. And you have a rally where the people showing up, a lot of them are working people, maybe some of them are not, but they already agree. The rational kernel is already there. And there's quite a few of them. There was 10 points that were quite radical. Rearticulate them towards socialism. And if you can't do it, fuck it. If you can't do it, fuck it. But there was so much potential that thing left unrealized had the existing progressive forces of the left done what in other ages, at least I think so, that's what reading history books lets me to believe. In other ages they would have done, and they would have led the movement, and it would have been a bigger protest. It would have had a maybe more ideologically coherent, although that's not what we should expect. Martin Luther King, in the development of the peace movement against the war in Vietnam, was purity his measure? Was he saying, no, this guy did something fucked up in his life, his character is condemnable, he shouldn't be here, and if he's here, I'm not going to be here? Was that the standard for the peace movement in the past, the one that succeeded?
No. What gave us the civil rights revolution, the social revolution? What gave us this? It was demanding the necessary things for society to continue on. That's what it was. It wasn't saying these people are good, these people are bad. It was not that. And here's the thing. They act as if, being at this place with these people is tainting them somehow. I can't work with them. Why is that working with them? Are you forming a new organization where you guys have to mix your ideas together? No, what it is that they are not confident in their own ideas and think it will be subsumed by this other force. And what that is not having Marxism. If you have Marxism, you are confident, believe me, because Marxism gives you a deeper view, right? It gives you a deeper view of society than anything else around, certainly than a libertarian. If you can't outmaneuver a libertarian in how to approach society, then you need to go back to school before you decide on any political movement at all in tactics. You need that first.
Absolutely. And we have someone here I want to engage as one of the critics. I think this is a straw man of the principled left opposition. Well, what were the replies of the left? I saw three, right? One of them came from the Black Agenda Report, wonderful website. They do things they publish things that I disagree with. They hold on to certain theories that I disagree with, like settler colonialism and all that. But they're very good on some other stuff. And I follow their website. We've republished their stuff in our institute quite a few times. And one of their things was that they were not invited as being a part of a movement like the Black Alliance for Peace, the Answer Coalition, other movements that have been active against war for the last 2 decades at the very least. And, we address that. You're not invited, show up and lead. Show up and lead. And you know what? It's fair. The people who organized the Rage Against the War Machine protests, they should have invited them.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't, if
Absolutely.
you're genuinely in favor of peace. And if I think that the People's Party one, those are ex-Bernie people. If they're on the left, they should have invited. If they're willing to have libertarians there, they should have invited the other people on the left that have been leading the anti-war movement, which hasn't really, for frank, it hasn't done much, but they have been leading protests. They should have invited them, and that's a fair critique. That's a fair critique. That shouldn't take away from the fact that you could go there and you could lead. You could go there and you could lead, and that's what other forces in the past have done. The other critique that I saw, there's questionable personalities there. There's people who have done messed up things that are condemnable. Okay. That's horrible. Fuck those people.
Yeah.
But so what? The movement is not just them. The movement is not, again, do you think MLK was like, okay, let's do a background check on each person that's here. And if we find something condemnable, one or two things, we're not doing it anymore. They either leave, or if they're here, I'm not going to stay here. Was that what MLK would have done? Really? No, of course not. And what was the other critique? I don't know. Those are the two main ones. I read all the articles that were critical of it. Those are really the two main ones. So
Yeah.
I think those are easily traced back to the purity fetish. You're expecting purity from something that's not going to be pure, that's going to be broad. And the paradox is this. People from these circles have been the ones trying to develop a popular front for a peace movement. So they're saying, we don't want ideological purity. We need a popular front like what King did. What? So it's a popular front with who? Who's acceptable? Well, it's just the liberals and the PMC and the academy. Those are the people that are okay because they're enlightened on these other issues.
If it feels like a fancy college campus, then it's fine.
Then it's acceptable. They might not agree about Marxism, but they're liberals and they're PMC and they're students, and that's acceptable. These other people, no. And I think that's a paradox. If you have the idea that in order to build a peace movement, you can't be that ideologically, rigid. You need to have people that have different ideas that come together for a fight for peace. That was a perfect example of that. And if you hold on to that idea and you didn't support that, it means that there's only a certain type of people that you want to do that with. And those are the people that are pure enough for you. It's the purity fact. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I actually do have a critique of it. And here's my critique. The attendance was it wasn't low.
This was the other one. The two white.
That's one that was. Yeah, but invite these groups, right? Or if you're there, show up and lead, right? Just show up, lead it, take the stage, take the spotlight from all of your political enemies. I'm not friendly with the Mises people. I would have no problem taking the stage and the spotlight and using it to subtly show why their answers are silly, right? And why we have the right ones. But here's my critique, is that the impact was rather low, especially for the huge names they had there. Tulsi Gabbard was there. Dennis Kucinich was there. I mean, there were big names. And by the way, I actually ran into Dennis Kucinich at a Thai restaurant a while ago. Super awesome. Anytime you see him, he remembered us. Anyway,
a Thai restaurant?
Yeah, and it's
like a fancy, like you have to wear a tie.
No, like Thailand. Like egg roll. Yeah.
I thought you meant like a
Siam Cafe, and it's one of the best
places
in Cleveland. Okay. But so there's something going on if there's only a couple thousand people there, right? And what I think it is they did not account enough for the purity fetish. They knew people would be organizing against them, right? And trying to prevent people from going to this rally through whatever means necessary. And I believe that there are people on both sides of this that's led to that. And what it's done is split people, which is what the ruling class wants. They want more division. They want every issue they can to be a wedge issue. So here's the thing. I don't care which side of this you fall down on, whether you were for this rally or against it. Don't let it get in the way of class struggle. Don't let it divide us, right? Come together afterwards. Like we were saying before this, criticize us if you think we're wrong about something, but criticize what we're actually saying, just like we would give you that respect, right? And so I think they didn't account for that. They didn't account for the bourgeois operators that could easily be doing that on their behalf, or just the general sort of tactical situation of ideological struggle in our era, right? By some of their big supporters, I've been attacked online, right? Because we're not a political institution. So why would we have, said one way or the other whether we hold their view on X, Y, and Z, right? And they tried to set this up with me in a like sort of like one of those silly social media tricks, like, why hasn't Midwestern Marx done X, Y, and Z yet, to get us to do what they want? Anytime you do that to me, by the way, I'm not going to comply. No American working class person is ever going to do what you want them to while you're underhandedly trying to make them do it. Instead, just approach people honestly, man. Just do that. It's not hard to do.
Absolutely. Is there anything that you feel like we left off the table with this discussion?
No, I think it's pretty well covered, and it does tie really well into the last topic of the night, which
I
is
agree.
your.
I
Oh yeah, go
I
ahead.
felt like I had something more to say about it, but it's not coming to me now. I was following, some of the most of the coverage that I saw was from, our friends at RBN, specifically Sabby Sabs, and a few other people. And I got to be honest, man, I was a little bit disappointed with the turnout. I was hoping that having it be that broad would invite more people. So I do think that the people who hosted it, they should rethink their strategy, because um, the popularity of the war in Ukraine just keeps going down and down and down. And there's a lot of sectors in society that 55% of them are like against the proxy war against Russia. So I feel like the turnout could have been a whole lot better, and the execution could have been better. So I would say, I don't know if they're listening, but for the people that coordinated the event, figure out how to make the ones in the future better. And I don't want to throw stones from a place I haven't tried to do one of these events before. So I may try and get nowhere near to what they did, but I think that with the popularity with the decline in popularity of this war, more could have been done, and maybe there could have been a better way to approach these other groups that ended up being critical from beforehand. I mean, from the first moment that there was a critique levied, I think that these groups should have been approached. And what we would have done, had we forgotten, I don't think we would have ever forgotten, but what we would have done was something along the lines of, you're right.
Yeah.
Do you want to come? Do you each of these groups? Do you want to give a speaker or two? Let's
It
come
was
together. I think that
an
was
incredible
the right response.
Yeah, it was an incredibly fair critique. Like, let's be real, it was. And so,
But they
that's
still
the
should have been
solution.
there. Right.
Right. I want to do address one more thing. Our favorite mod here, Cobra Commander, says, you convinced me to change my thinking. I got to tell you, it's going to be hard to take in libertarians are more class conscious than libs, but I will try. I just want to address this real quick because we love you, Cobra Commander, but I don't want to say they're more class conscious than libs. I want to say they're both not class conscious, right? But there is this myth that liberals are somehow closer to us, and they're not. We need to approach this from a class perspective. Liberals, especially in our era, are increasingly bloodthirsty and increasingly upper classes, right? That's just how it is. Where do you see the Ukraine flags usually? And it's all from the liberal sort of media apparatus. You see them in the suburbs. You see them in the gentrified areas of the city. You don't see them in the hood. You don't see them in the trailer park. None of that, right? So I just want to say, like, libertarianism, I think, is sort of a false consciousness in a way, not close enough, right? But the reason they're libertarians is because they see something broken. They've just been manipulated on what's broken and how to fix it. They aren't, and this goes into that whole left-right paradigm and viewing it from the Marxist materialist perspective rather than the dogmatic bourgeois one. The bourgeois one says this and that make you left, that and this make you right. We don't say that. We say it's the material progression of society, right? And so that's a way different way to view what is left and right. And therefore, it is the class forces that we see someone in the working class, even if they came through libertarian, gets it way easier.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful way to roll into the next segment. We'll have a little 5-second break, and then we'll start with the other one.
All right. Last segment of the night. This was one of my favorite pieces that Carlos has ever written, and I've read everything he's written. Well, not everything, but all the important stuff, right? I don't read your stuff for school and all.
Academy,
But,
yeah, the journal articles and shit.
mhm.
Yeah.
Right. And it's an important topic in our time because as capitalism becomes more and more impossible, we have two situations in front of us. And I mean this with all seriousness. It's socialism or it's fascism. There's no in between. As capitalism confronts its impossibility of continuing on in the old way, right? We either see the working class organize itself and establish itself in a new way as a ruling class to overcome those limitations, or we see the ruling class win and just beat us down and further go to extremes to keep its system in power. So when we talk about what can create those, and I'm sure Carlos will go into this, national nihilism is something that is absolutely detrimental in this situation for us. And Georgy Dimitrov, one of the best theorists when it comes to fascism and understanding it, he explains why that is.
Absolutely. And this is this article was actually not written to be an article. It's a section of the book that I'm working on, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. And it's embedded in this larger chapter where I'm developing the three primary forms in which the purity fetish manifests itself in the US. The first one very clearly is, Western Marxists looking at socialist states and saying, that's not pure enough. That doesn't hit every marker that I have set for what socialism actually is, and therefore I am rejecting it. The second one is one that we see certain more far left sections of the U.S. left use, which is, an attitude that comes from Comrade Hillary Clinton, which just looks at Trump, poor people and working class people who voted for Trump and says, these are a basket of deplorables. This is the heart of a fascist threat, and all these people are irredeemable, and they're ontologically bad, and we can't work with them, right? It completely rejects because they're too impure, because they don't measure up to all the ideals that they have set as what ideas working people must accept in order for us to organize them. We're not going to organize them, and we're going to brand them as the enemy of this movement towards socialism. It's only the enlightened workers that we want to work with. That, again, is not only undialectical as hell, as every manifestation of the purity fetish is, but is against the spirit of Marxism-Leninism, which has always told us that you have to bring in the backwards elements and elevate their consciousness through the process of class struggle. The third primary form that I see the purity fetish manifest itself is in the way that American socialists relate to their national past. Because the history of the U.S. is impure, because we do have in our past a genocide of native peoples, because we do have a horrendous history of the enslavement of Africans, because we have a horrible history of the suppression and repression of women, a horrible history of exploitation and child labor, and a history of imperialism, which you could say in some form its militaristic dimension starts with the Monroe Doctrine at the beginning of the 19th century. In the 20th century, wars like Iraq that have killed more than 1 million people. We have a very, very bad, dirty, evil history. But these people look at that and they say, okay, that's America. Okay, that one part, that's the whole. They treat it synecdochally. They take one small part and they say that's the whole. So when we talk about America, we're talking about all this evil stuff, and that's it. So we're just going to reject all of the past and frame what we're doing as something that's radically new, something that's in line with the abolish America or death to America. And these are slogans that people on the left still share around. And I think that the problem is this: it's a lack of dialectical thinking, because in the same way that we have all of that evil stuff be America, America also contains the other side of it, which is the history of struggle of indigenous people, of working people, of black people against chattel slavery, for civil rights, for the attainment of the vote, the history of women's suffrage, a very progressive history, a history for a peace movement, a history against empire, a history for socialism, the history of the Communist Party, of the Socialist Labor Party, of the Socialist Party, of the IWW, which was founded in the US. We have an extremely progressive history, a history of socialist utopian experiments, which were, part of the source that Marx and Engels used to drink out of and to develop scientific socialism, a necessary mediational step towards scientific socialism. Most of those utopian communist experiments were in the US. We also have a period of Reconstruction in which, for a very small amount of time in the South, you had a dictatorship of labor, where the freedmen and white labor came together and commanded that the interest of labor be put forward, and that the interest of this oppressed class of 4 million recently freed black workers is put forward against the Southern oligarchy. We have a very rich history of struggle, a very progressive history, that when you say that America is just the ugly part, you're rejecting all of that progressive history. And the reality is that if you're actually fighting for socialism, your struggle is in a historical line with that past. And if you are not cognizant of that, you're removing the historical legs of the movement. That phenomenon of looking to the past and saying, no, there's nothing here that I can use, everything here is bad and everything here is condemnable, and we need to break with everything and just have something new, that is national nihilism. And it manifests itself in a different form in socialist states, which is a form that they have called historical nihilism, which is people saying socialism in our past has failed because socialism is now a part of their past. It's national nihilism, but they call it historical nationalism to speak specifically about their socialist experiment. And if every document that you look at the Communist Party of China today, they condemn historical nihilism left and right. Part of the reasons why they think the Soviet Union fell, you look at the work of Cheng and Fu, one of the leading people in the Chinese Academy for Social Sciences. He gives 3 causes for why the Soviet Union fell: ideological, organizational, and political. The ideological one, that's where historical nihilism is in. The Khrushchev speech and the rejection of Stalin, the complete process of de-Stalinization, they consider that the first mistake, the first place where the Soviet Union went wrong, and that led to anyone being able to come into the party, not having committed communists in the parties, and then the eventual betrayal by Gorbachev and all the other snakes that performed a counter-revolution that was promoted by the West and by imperialism in the Soviet Union. So national and historical nihilism have always been seen as things that must be combated by the communist movement. And the U.S. communist left is embedded in national nihilism. It looks at its past and it says no. And what it does in that state, especially states like ours that are in crisis, where socialism and fascism are equal potentials for the future, what it does is give its own history. The positive parts that the American people accept and the negative parts, it gives it up to the fascists. And it's not without a coincidence that this idea of national nihilism really gets concretized by Georgy Dimitrov in the 7th Congress of the Comintern, when they're realizing that they have to change the tactic and how they've been approaching the fight against fascism. And the context in which he brings it up in the US is saying, the fascists are going to take Lincoln, they're going to take Washington, they're going to take your progressive figures and align their movement with those figures that the American people already accept. You cannot let that happen. You have to rescue the best parts of the American past and align your struggle today with that so that you have a common thread and something that's already in the common sense of the American people. Again, it's just about taking the rational kernels of the common sense of the American people and rearticulating those towards socialism. You can't do that if you have national nihilism. You're rejecting the traditions that the American people have come to accept. You're not only wrong in terms of assessing your positions with relationship to truth, because you're wrong about the history of the US. You're rejecting the progressive history. You consider it to be an outside factor. No, it's an imminent development of this totality, which is embedded in objective contradictions, which we call America. So you're not only historically wrong, but you're futile from a revolutionary standpoint, because you won't be able to connect yourself to your working masses and lead a revolutionary movement.
Well, when they do this, it seems to me just an arbitrary playing with words, right? When we say Harriet Tubman is one of the greatest American heroes in history, this is a fact. Harriet Tubman was American, and she was a hero. She was an officer in the Union Army, waged a guerrilla campaign, helped escape slaves to freedom. This is giant. This is American, and this is the basis for what became the future, right? When they tell us, oh, well, actually, she was fighting against America, all you're doing is redefining this to exclude everything you don't want to call it part of it, right? George Washington was American. Thomas Jefferson was American, right? Just as Andrew Jackson was, just as Barack Obama was. The premise of Marxism itself is class struggle. And one of the best ways of distilling this is Stalin, when he talks about it is precisely because a thing is developed that we can tell it's undeveloping. Now, when we add to this that motion is our defining element, we focus on the nascent or progressive aspect as what is definitional at that point in time, right? So at that point in time, Harriet Tubman was the USA, just like as at this point in time, we are the USA. And to pretend we are not, like we're somehow removed from it, or I'm a citizen of the world because I'm from cosmopolitan New York and I'm upper class. No, you're not. You're American. You're just on the wrong side of the class divide, right? The working class is what is progressive, right? And so this is defining for us. It is the new thing coming into being. The old thing is already developed and is withering away. As we develop and continue on, we are becoming this thing and sublating the old and becoming the whole developed thing. And so the way national nihilism works into this for me is through exactly what Carlos said, right? Just as Benito Mussolini stole Garibaldi from the Italian people, the right tried to steal our heroes. And if you're saying you're a communist, letting them have a figure like Abraham Lincoln that every communist in history has praised, you're revealing yourself as not a Marxist, because your present premise is not that class motion, but anti-American in what is becoming America, that is the socialism that we are the ground floor of right now.
I want to address a comment real quick. Someone says that the goal is to overthrow the American empire, not romanticizing it. Yeah, precisely because that's the goal. It's almost line by line a Lenin quote. Precisely because we love our progressive past, we love our people, and we love humanity at large, and because we're driven, as Che used to say, by a great feeling of love, is why we hate the exploitative and oppressive part of our history, why we hate empire. And yes, we want to abolish empire. The abolishing part of sublation is abolishing empire, because the empire is grounded on capitalism. Imperialism is nothing more than the development of capitalism to a certain stage where it needs to go abroad and conquer territories all over the world. And so, yeah, we want to abolish the American empire. We don't want to romanticize the empire, but we want to take back the positive figures in the history of this totality that it's America, that's it contains, as everything else within it, objective contradictory forces, a progressive aspect, a reactionary aspect, and we have to put our chips on the progressive aspect, because if not, the most reactionary forces today, the fascists, are going to take that history from us and align themselves with the American people, because we didn't do it. And that's been a mistake that has been criticized by every communist movement in the history of communism, at least since, Marx and Engels.
I had to pull up the exact quote. It's from a fantastic essay called On the National Pride of the Great Russians. And the situation was so remarkably similar. Lenin called Russia the prison house of nations. Who has inherited that title in our era? It's the United States, right? And here's what Lenin says. He says, is a sense of national pride alien to us, great Russian class-conscious proletarians? Certainly not. We love our language and our country, and we are doing our very utmost to raise her toiling masses, i.e. 9/10 of her population, to the level of democratic and socialist consciousness. To us, it is most painful to see and feel the outrages, the oppression, and the humiliation our fair country suffers at the hands of the czar's butchers, or the oligarchy's butchers, right? The nobles and the capitalists. We take pride in the resistance to the outrages put up from our midst, from the great Russians, just like we take pride in the resistance to chattel slavery, to Jim Crow, to capitalism itself, right? We are doing precisely what Lenin did. And the idea that people would even try to call themselves Leninist while going against everything Lenin stood for is bonkers.
One of the questions that I wanted to bring up here, I think it's a good one. But sure, why does this historical reclamation process matter? Why not just focus on our material conditions today? Well, I think for two reasons. I think engaging with truth is revolutionary. And insofar as these people continue to treat America synecdochally, undialectically, and through the lens of the purity fetish, they're going to be wrong. So truth matters, one. The second one, which is really the most important one, which are the practical implications of this. Let me pull up this document. This was just voted in favorably by the majority of Democrats and by every single Republican. It's a resolution denouncing the horrors of socialism and drawing a contradistinction between the tradition, the more positive parts of the tradition of 1776 and the Declaration of Independence, and communism. So what has our ruling class done? What has McCarthyism done? It has said, socialism is here. The American people are here. There's an unbridgeable gulf in the middle. Socialism and the U.S. and the traditions that the American people accept are incompatible. And what is the left today doing? It's taking that ideological gun that McCarthy had pointed at them, and it's pointed it at itself. Our job requires demystifying both the story that's told about America, which suppresses in history books the progressive history, the history of labor, of socialism, the role of the Communist Party. All of this history is ignored. The way it reads events, it's half-truths and ignoring a bunch of things. We have to both do that, but also demystify socialism and show, as the famous saying goes, that socialism is as American as apple pie. The first thing a working class person, or one of the things, maybe not, but one of the doubts that could come about is, hey, the media, the schools, and my family has always told me that socialism is bad, that it is anti-American, that it's killed 30 million people or 100 million people or 100 billion people, whatever the fuck. They're going to tell you that at some point. That's going to be a question that arises at some point. Concerning the America side, it's going to be hard to answer that if you have this idea of America that sees that there's no progressive or socialist or communist past. Now, if you have an idea which says, actually, utopian communism really developed under the U.S., and the people that wrote the 1776 Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, but the more progressive elements that were cited with him, those guys were red-baited in the same way that today communists are, because they supported the French Revolution, which was abolitionist in character. They were called atheists, communists, and they were red-baited, agents of a foreign government. Who gets called agents of a foreign government today? It's the communists. Well, can we realize the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness under our current system? Do we have a government of, by, and for the people when capital is in command? We don't. What is a government of, by, and for the people then? It's socialism. It's
Yep.
socialism. When you do that, when you trace this tradition of, it's always been held ever since the development of socialism in the US in the 1820s, that socialism is the logical and practical conclusion of the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, which cannot be fulfilled under the conditions of capitalism. If you approach it from that angle, you're going to have a whole lot more success than any other angle. The other point that I want to make is, I guess, a point that's a little bit deeper in the weeds. It gets into the way that dialectics thinks about categories, which is the relationship.
Let me interrupt real quick before you do that, because I just want to add on that what this does is it turns socialism into a foreign ideology that is going to come in and suppress us as Americans. And that's precisely what the ruling class has always done, right? It's a Russian thing or a Chinese thing, but socialism is what America is trending towards. It simply is. And it is up to us to figure out how to do that. And I also want to address some of the people in the chat who are saying, like, Jefferson was bad and this and that. Put away the purity fetish. Put away the purity fetish, brother. He was what history made him, and we can accept the progressive role that Declaration of Independence played, while still acknowledging that, he was a slave owner. Lacerda calls this a dual nature of liberalism. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Go off, and I'm enjoying your rant. I just had to get that out.
The twin birth of liberalism.
Mm.
Yes, and is Bolivar perfect? Who also had slaves? Who include had little kids forced to. He wasn't perfect. But one of the most successful things we've seen in the last 20 years is the development of Bolivarian socialism.
Yep.
So come on, guys. What are we doing? Was Martí perfect? Did he have the perfect views? No, but Martí is fundamental for the Cuban Revolution. They call him the literal apostle of the Cuban Revolution. Today in China, they're literally going back and seeing in their extremely ancient 5,000-year-old civilization, they're seeing what from the past, what from the Confucian and Taoist and these other excellent philosophical traditions, what can we use in the present? And why is that, ladies and gentlemen? Why is that? Because if socialism is this universal thing that we see that it's a universal thing, universals do not exist out in the open. They don't exist, in the abstract. There's no such thing as abstract universals. The way that philosophy used to think about universals, which is that thing which exists everywhere and in all places and at all moments in the same way, that way of thinking about universals is wrong. Nothing exists that way. Everything exists in accordance with context, with time and place. And the idea that we have in the dialectical tradition, from Hegel to Marx to Lenin to Mao, is the idea of a concrete universal. The universal exists only insofar as it can concretize itself in the particular, only insofar as it can take a determinate form. So socialism as a universal requires it taking a determinate form. It's always going to be a specific type of socialism in line with the traditions of the place it's taking root in. Socialism in the Soviet Union had the characteristics of the Russian population, of the Russian civilization. Socialism in China, what is it called since 78? Socialism with Chinese characteristics. What is socialism in Venezuela called? Bolivarian socialism. What is the socialism in Bolivia doing? It's incorporating the indigenous communist, primary communist traditions in its analysis of Marx and combining scientific socialism with the indigenous communist communities that they have. That means it's taking the universal and concretizing it through the particular. What is socialism in Africa? How has it been formulated? Oh, Pan-African socialism. What about socialism in the Middle East? Islamic socialism. So if we say socialism in the U.S. is not going to take the characteristics of the U.S., that is a liberal tinted American exceptionalism. We are the exception. The whole world has to apply socialism according to its concrete conditions, to its history, the traditions of its people. But no, we're the exception. We're better than that. We have the luxury of ignoring our past and just formulating this pure socialism. That is a form of chauvinism. That is a form of American exceptionalism that we have to reject and realize that socialism in the US is going to take American characteristics. It's going to take shape in accordance with the progressive history of our country. That's the only way it's going to occur.
I'm finding it hard to follow that rant because it was so good. This is what we mean by American Marxism. When we talk about formulating in the modern day an American Marxism through our experience, our own particular form of the universal Marxism, just as we are growing now an American communist movement again, right? There's never, ever, ever going to be Soviet communism here. There's never going to be Chinese communism or anything like that. And what is our progressive tradition, right? If we pretend Harriet Tubman was not American and actually against America, we have none, right? We're all these boundless, abstract, independent, universal subjects, right? Like exactly what liberalism conceits that everyone is. And we are not the particular in which we're made rising as a universal and a proletariat and rude proletariat, right? We're not that. We're this, universal thing. I'm getting off topic, but what really matters, and this is why we take back our history, is that people intuit this thing, right? The American masses don't love Abraham Lincoln for no reason. And they don't view the Declaration of Independence the way the ultra left does, right? They view it as independence and sovereignty for what becomes the American people. And when we talk about what I call in my book, the broken bourgeois promise of a government of, by, and for the people, of the rights, and rights are something established and fought for and then protected by the state. The rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, none of which we have in capitalism. What is able to create those? Only socialism. And what is the only socialism we can possibly have in America? American socialism. And according to Lenin, without the most revolutionary theory, you have no revolutionary movement. What do you need then for American socialism? American Marxism.
Beautifully said. Someone said mic drop. Absolutely. You gotta do that. But yeah, I mean, it's the level of exceptionalism that it takes to say this is how it's worked everywhere, but we're going to be the exception. It's, you said it perfectly fine. You can't have Jucha in the U.S. It's not going to work. It's Korean form of socialism, and it's wonderful that it is, and we should study it and see what points of similarities there are. What can we learn? We have to realize that the same work that they did to see how they can connect their civilization to socialism, we have to do here. And this is what every American Marxist has understood over the last, however long. Like if the Declaration of Independence was read by Herbert Aptheker, one of the most prominent historians in American history, a communist and the editor of the theoretical journal of the Communist Party, Political Affairs, he read it as, of course, flawed. It has this understanding of human beings that it's abstract universal, and in actuality, the way that it was practiced, it was a broken promise, as Noah says, and as MLK said, a blank check. It gave a blank check to black folks, and we could say, to poor folks and pretty much everyone that's not able to experience life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or a government of, by, and for the people. But it was nonetheless seen as a historically progressive event that was hated by the most reactionary forces all over the world. I mean, you couldn't read the Declaration of Independence in the feudal states in Europe. Like, if you were a teacher and you brought it to your students, you would get fired, right? That's how, how progressive it was at its time. It had a bunch of limitations, but it was very progressive. And it was the ideological force for what ended up being the first anti-colonial movement in the Americas that inspired a host of others, perhaps a little bit more progressive movements, such as, the Haitian movement for liberation, which was led by slaves, or the French Revolution, which was very much inspired by the American Revolution. And without it, it couldn't have taken place. So we have this wonderful history. We have this history that has been read correctly by the Marxists of the past, which existed in moments when the socialist struggle was stronger than the one that we have now. I mean, go look at Du Bois, read Black Reconstruction. You're going to see that the most progressive figures during the Civil War, the Second American Revolution, the era of Reconstruction that comes right after, the most progressive figures like Sumner, figures like Stevens, those figures saw what they were doing, saw this genuine potential for emancipation for 4 million Black workers, giving them civil rights and fulfilling for everyone an economic program, political program that would guarantee life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that would guarantee a government of, by, and for the people, that would purge the Southern oligarchy and the the oligarchy of the North, the aristocrats of industry. They saw that as being the realization, the actualization of the Declaration of Independence, of the spirit of the founders. Read Du Bois. He felt the same way. He even recognizes that the more messed up things, the founding fathers expected to go away. They recognized it was wrong and they expected to go away within a generation. That didn't happen. But he still nonetheless sees that the ability for America to realize itself, to concretize the values it was founded on, is grounded on the ability of working people to unite, of the Black proletariat to lead and to establish a more democratic society, a new democracy. In the words of Mao, a new democracy, a form, a society in which labor is in command and not capital, which is really a society in which regular common folk are in command and not capital. And he sees that again as a realization of these older traditions. And it's if you're genuinely grounded in the most progressive figures of your past, if you're reading your Du Bois, if you're reading your Winston, if you're reading your King, if you're reading your Aptheker and your William Z. Foster and your Debs, you will not have the capacity, if you're faithful to that tradition, to end up where the American left is today, which is just historical nihilism through and through, a theory that's grounded on this idea that there's this inability, this ontological inability of the white working class to be revolutionary, to unite with other portions of the working class, and that theory preaches division. And the whole purpose of this tradition of anti-racist activism, of the tradition that has fought a class struggle in the determinate form of the struggle against racism, against sexism, that whole tradition has said, well, how do we overcome this disunity that has been foisted on working people by the ruling class? The sake of it has been unity. How do we unite people? And today, people like Du Bois, like King, are being used to proliferate the very divisions that they sought to understand in order to overcome and create a united working class movement. And we have to fight against that.
100%. That was so well said, brother. I think I really want to address, we have a few commenters in our Twitch chat. And this one guy, Jackar, keeps asking these type of questions. And I want to say, he says, are we trying to tail the masses or lead them? Well, it's both, right? If we are looking at it dialectically, the masses are who lead us and we take our cues from. And at the same time, we lead them into the next thing. The Communist Party is not preaching down from above, right? But involved in the proletariat. And it's a certain kind of social chauvinism that sees us as better than the working class. And that really grinds my gears. But who cares about what I think? What did Lenin think? Right? He's a lot smarter than I'll ever be. And he said, we do not build socialism with human material specially prepared by us or human material of the future. We build socialism with human material given to us in the present, meaning built from what is around us, created by the culture and world that they grow up in, right? So all of that is just to say you meet people where they are, and if you can properly reflect their intuition, their common sense, etc., and explain to them why they should be either joining or following or supporting the Communist Party as we rebuild it into revolution, because that's the way out, the way to make their life better, then you're there, brother. The rest of that stuff, pretending the working masses have to audition for us in some way and they're wrong and we need to dismiss them or scold them or whatever it is just a middle class chauvinism.
Absolutely. It's a process of both and. You got to learn from the masses, understand their fragmentary and incoherent worldviews, so that from there you find the rational kernels that you can take them to socialism with. Right. That's it. So you got to learn from the masses, know them in order to lead them. As Marx said very clearly, the educator must be educated. If you want to function as a vanguard, as an intellectual leadership for the movement towards socialism, you need to learn from your masses. You can't you can't lead that which you don't know what it is you're leading. You need to learn from your masses, and that's the way that they're going to be able to look at you and gain your trust and follow you. They're not going to follow you if you're disconnected. If you're holding up to these, PMC Enlightenment values up here and condemning them because they're down here and don't hold them. If you're making socialist meetings feel like HR meetings or diversity, equity, and inclusion meetings in university, if that's what you're doing, they ain't following you, bro. They're not. Maybe the students will, but the working class is not going to follow you. And this is not tailing, the working class. This is going down to the masses so that you can come up with them, so that you can bring them up. You can elevate their consciousness. You can elevate their feelings, their passions towards socialism. It's a process of going down to go up, not going down and staying there or just staying up here so that they do not even see you or are capable of following you.
100%, brother. And our brother Gus James Nettleton, I think, said it best: from the masses to the masses. Right? Taking what they have, showing the revolutionary solution to the problem, and giving it back. It's always from and to. Always from and to. And I just want to say one other thing. It's show up and lead.
Absolutely. That was a good quote from earlier today. I'm inserting into the chat the article that we were discussing.
I can pull it up.
Concerning National and Historical Nihilism. A few days before I decided to put it out, I mentioned that it's really a section of my book. I decided to put it out as an article because we had done a stream a few days before talking about the denunciation of the horrors of socialism, not Bill, but the thing that had just passed. And we had someone ask about national nihilism. So I felt it was important to highlight this, to publish this section of my upcoming book. And you're going to find here both Dimitrov, you're going to find Stalin, you're going to find Lenin, Xi Jinping, Deng, Mao, criticizing the phenomenon of both historical and national nihilism. And you're going to find me sort of concretizing it as a way of thinking about how we overcome this in the U.S. and how we, first of all, even signal it as a problem. But also, if you want to engage with some of these other ideas that we've been tossing around today, such as the purity fetish, such as the critique of the PMC, or the necessity of rearticulating the rational kernels within the masses' fragmentary worldviews towards socialism, I would definitely recommend that you pick up our second issue of the Journal of American Socialist Studies, where myself and Noah tackle issues of that nature, where we have an interview with Noam Chomsky and a variety of other articles from communist activists and communist professors from around the world, and where we also have a wonderful article from Eddie giving a historical and dialectical materialist account of the development of the American healthcare system. So here's the cover. It's a wonderful, very beautiful cover done by our graphic designer out of Serbia. So yeah, pick that up if you have a chance. I'm going to link it to the chat. But anything else you want to plug today, Noah?
No, that's it. Just this weekend, that Du Bois Symposium that I'll be speaking at. It's really good. What the first panel I'm going to be on is on reclaiming Du Bois from the Bourgeois Academy, and then the next one, which is a sort of more of a roundtable, is on. Oh God, why am I'm blanking on it? I have it right here. No, I don't.
The revolutionary synthesis, Lenin and Du
That's
Bois.
right.
Yeah.
So yeah, the ideas of the free school is a revolutionary synthesis of Lenin and Du Bois, which for us, that's American Marxism, right? Du Bois and Henry Winston and probably Herbert Aptheker are like the founding fathers of American Marxism. So please, if you can, donate there. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to that.
I have
See
linked.
you. Oh,
I have linked the donation, the PayPal donation option to the comments. Again, if you can spare a few bucks, that would be very much appreciated. Noah has to, pay for gas for like a 7-8 hour drive and pay for a motel for 2 days. So please, if you can spare, help us out with fundraising for this trip. We hope to do similar in-person activities with the Institute in the future. So this is, really exciting. It's the first in-person thing that someone from the Midwestern Marx Institute is participating on. So we are very happy. And we also think that, ideologically, Du Bois is, our rock. So it's very important that you tune in. If you're in the Philadelphia area, make sure to show up. But if you're not, we will be sharing through our social media where you can find the live stream through the Saturday Free School YouTube channel. It's a wonderful project out of Philadelphia that's, doing terrific things in developing, what we call American Marxism. But, what for them is just being grounded in Du Bois and thinking in a way that it's guided towards emancipation and towards understanding, and having some ideological clarity in the present moment that we're in. So make sure to check them out. And if you're in the area, go to the event, or if not, tune into our social media so that you can watch it live. And if you have the means and want to help, please do consider donating through the fundraiser that we linked in the chat.
Before we go, one of the great things about this is not everyone speaking agrees on everything. Right? There are non-Marxists all up and down there, but it don't matter. We're there to discuss what needs to be done. And the only other thing is that picture of Du Bois just super reminds me of my grandfather. Imagine like a brown Georgian guy with jowls, and the rest of that is Du Bois, right? Like, so add jowls, add the brown instead of black, and you got my grandpa.
Absolutely. You got to show me a picture of your grandpa.
I will. I'll text it to you after this.
He was described. Du Bois was described by Vijay Prashad as the American Lenin, and I think that that's a fitting comment, both because of the activism that Du Bois participated in. He was the founder of organizations like the NAACP, and before that, the Niagara Club, which was the sort of precursor of the NAACP. But he was an activist through and through. Always fighting for emancipation, not just writing from an ivory tower, but also it highlights the brilliance of both Lenin and Du Bois. Lenin is often undermined, just seen as the guy that did the practice. Marx was the one that thought, and Lenin just practiced it. And that's not true. Lenin was perhaps one of the more creative theoreticians in the Marxist tradition that we've seen. And the same could be said about Du Bois, a person that was constantly developing in his life and who, developed towards the end of his life into joining the Communist Party. And yeah, so it's a wonderful figure. But we'll roll out with the same video that we used for our introduction. Thank you all for being here with us for more than 2 hours now. So thanks for watching, and check us out on our social media. If you can donate to help Noah get to Philly, please do. And thanks again.
And economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.